inauguration, one of the first executive orders President Trump signed was titled Ending Radical and Wasteful Government DEI Programs that initiated an aggressive process to dismantle federal DEI programs, offices, and programs. Federal contractors are now required to certify that they do not operate DEI programs that promote workforce diversity based on race, gender, or other characteristics. Equity-related grants and training contracts were terminated. Resources were removed from federal websites. Educational institutions that receive federal funding may not work with DEI initiatives or private companies. The impact of this on the federal workforce has been dramatic. Employee resource groups provided to support underrepresented groups have been suspended or disbanded. Employees involved in DEI were placed on leave and faced layoffs. Worry about being labeled a DEI hire created widespread anxiety about job security. As you might imagine, this is having a devastating impact on morale, especially among BIPOC and LGBTQ+ employees. Mentorship programs and initiatives aimed at fostering diversity in career advancement have been halted. This shock and awe approach to the federal workforce upends long-standing bipartisan federal policy meant to open doors that had been unfairly closed. These actions reverse efforts to diversify our federal workforce. They go back to the 1960s, Democrat and Republican administrations alike. They go back to the Johnson administration, have supported systemic efforts to promote equity and remedy systemic discrimination. So, when I heard about this administration's effort to erase the words diversity, equity, and inclusion among the 200 other words was extending to government websites and requests for government funding, I felt I needed to speak out. I felt it was past time for Unitarian Universalists to respond and fight back against this racist, gender-biased, homo and transphobic, ahistorical, anti-science tactics of the Trump administration. If they want to eliminate those words from use, we can enthusiastically promote those words and use them frequently and persistently so they don't disappear. We will not be silenced. Diversity, equity, and inclusion live on here. My reading from the Purposes section of Article 2 of the UUA bylaws, revised in 2003 and supported by 80% of the delegates, states very clearly our unwavering support for the words diversity, equity, and inclusion. Almost all the words being banned are included in our core values. Many of them have broad support, too, in the American population. A close look at which words the Trump administration wants to eliminate reveals how different our values are from this administration, as if you didn't already know that. The real goals for eliminating diversity, equity, and inclusion become clear when examining the banned words. Top of the list of words to eliminate are words like race, ethnicity, anti-racist, identity, black, and BIPOC. If you don't want to address systemic racism, another two banned words, you don't use those words. And you also eliminate words that follow the word diversity, like diverse background or diverse communities or diverse group, as well as ethnicity and minorities. If they are not named, they disappear as categories that deserve attention. Without naming categories of people who are experiencing a problem, this administration doesn't need to use words that address barriers, bias, segregation, disparity, confirmation bias, implicit bias, or any kind of inequality. If there isn't a problem being identified, then there is no need to attend to equal opportunity, equality, enhancing or increasing diversity. Equity is unilaterally declared resolved. There is no need for any effort to develop cultural competence or appreciate cultural differences, heritages, or sensitivities, because none are recognized as creating a problem. And if there isn't a problem, then there is no need for allyship or sensitivity or being responsive. The word women might be a special case because they have been disadvantaged for a long time by patriarchy. Any references to women as a protected class has been eliminated. No references to men, however, are affected, except the only elimination of reference to men are men who have sex with men. The diversity, equity, and inclusion problem goes away because there are no words permitted to be used for it. Another category of words being eliminated relate to gender. This administration has decided there are now only two genders, male and female. So rather than deal with people who do not identify with the gender they were assigned at birth, or who have ambiguous genitalia, perhaps fixed through surgery at birth, or who have chromosomes that defy being one gender or the other, are resolved by just eliminating the words to describe them. Most of those words deleted are used to describe gender and gender identity that deviate from cisgender, particularly transgender, non-binary. No need to use pronouns, they, them, and gender identity or orientation. The largest group to eliminate revolve around the word inclusion. Maybe you'll start to recognize the pattern. It begins by denying there is a problem by eliminating the words like excluded, exclusion, inequality, inequitable, injustice, and health disparity. If you haven't named the problem, again, you can't measure it or find out people are underappreciated or underrepresented or underserved. No one is at risk and needs any advocacy because there isn't any oppression, polarization, stereotyping, or prejudice. And hate speech is just mislabeled free speech that doesn't do any harm. There are no victims or vulnerable populations of historically marginalized people, so we don't need to talk about them, nor is there any need for social justice. Are you following how this process works? There is no reason to study socio-cultural or socioeconomic trends or how social status or privilege work to reject any requests for funding to study areas like intersectionality or institutional racism, or affected key groups, people or key populations. This administration really wants to eliminate the field of sociology. Since there isn't a problem to be solved, no activism is required to address belonging, fostering inclusivity, and a sense of being valued. Now let me turn this around and turn it upside down, because we Unitarian Universalists and this congregation are deeply committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion. You heard in the reading how many, as I rang the little bell, how many of those banned words are used to recognize the systemic social problems that really do exist. Marginalized people do truly experience exclusion, inequality, injustice, and health disparities. They are often underappreciated, underrepresented, and underserved. Many are at risk and in the need of advocacy because they experience oppression, polarization, stereotyping, and prejudice, and are harmed by hate speech. Because of their historically marginalized status and vulnerability, they can be easily victimized. Social justice work and activism that address sociocultural and socioeconomic and intersectional issues with key groups and populations can make a positive difference that results in a sense of belonging and inclusion and feeling valued. A very important group who benefit from inclusion work are those who identify as non-binary and transgender. Honoring the self-identified diversity of gender expressions and affirming and providing affirming care can save lives that the gender dysphoric person may not want to live. It is a generous act of recognition and inclusion to use the requested pronouns that affirm someone's gender identity. Diversity and equity are special values for Unitarian Universalists. We reject the vision of America as an exclusive white, Christian, cisgender, heterosexual, able-bodied nation. The beloved community vision we cherish is of a rich cultural diversity of people of many shades of white, brown, yellow, red, and black. We celebrate cultural diversity and believe our differences can build a better nation. No one religious tradition should dominate. We welcome the development of a shared value system rooted in our diverse beliefs that respect our differences, yet build on an ethical framework of our commonalities. This is especially true of the Abrahamic religious traditions of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam that share history and sacred texts and traditions. We're also painfully aware of the cruelty, exploitation, oppression, and inhumanity practiced against people of African descent for over the last 400 years. That history and collective abuse cannot be equalized by some legal changes and the end of Jim Crow. It requires education, special attention to equal opportunity in hiring and equity at every level of society. Yes, we have made some gains, but as we discovered with the repeal of the voting rights legislation by the Supreme Court, the abuses were immediately set back in place to disadvantage black voters. And there is no reason to expect that that will not happen again under the guise of meritocracy. The repudiation of diversity, equity, and inclusion will only set us back, not move us forward. So every word that is being banned must be retained and frequently used to protect our vision of diversity, equity, and inclusion. We need to keep using these words in our vocabulary and in our writing and in our public speaking. You will not hear me shying away from using them regularly. They are part of our Unitarian Universalist core values. And if you have a marginalized identity, you need not hide it here. In our mission statement, we say, we are a welcoming, anti-oppressive congregation with love at the center. And the spiritual love we cherish can only happen when we are willing to fully know the other. We may not be perfect in our love, but that welcoming love is our commitment to each other. President Trump summarizes his regressive changes by saying he is rejecting being woke. As a dedicated meditator who deeply values the development of wisdom, I am trying to be fully awake all the time. Sleepy Donald doesn't want us to be awake, so we will not pay attention as he dismantles our democracy and establishes his authoritarian rule. We need to be more awake than ever to his efforts to wreck our international trading system and increase the distance between the rich and the poor. May our congregations be willing to say no to this administration's agenda and to erase the history of systemic oppression that lives on in the present. Let us stop its efforts to reestablish racist norms from the 1950s and re-impoverish Black and brown people. And may America wake up to what is happening and reject it in the next election cycle.